They said she'd live like a queen, private jets, 5-star hotels, endless luxury. But the crown they gave her was made of bruises. Every promise turned into a threat, every gift into a chain. The life she dreamed of became the cage she couldn't escape. The December rain hammered against Natasha's studio apartment window in Minsk, each droplet a percussion against glass that matched the rhythm of her typing. At 28, she'd already spent 6 years perfecting her craft, neural networks and machine learning systems that could predict user behavior with unsettling accuracy. Her algorithms could anticipate what you wanted before you knew you wanted it, a digital form of mind reading that tech companies would pay fortunes to possess. But fortunes weren't finding their way to Belarus. Not to her cramped apartment where she ate instant noodles 4 nights a week, where the heating worked only when it felt charitable, where her mother's medical bills accumulated like snow drifts that never melted. Natasha had talent, genius even, but genius born in the wrong geography rarely received the recognition it deserved. The email arrived on a Tuesday, buried between spam promising enlargement pills and Nigerian princes seeking wire transfers. What made her pause wasn't the sender, Technova Solutions, but the specificity of the message. They knew her work, cited her thesis on predictive behavioral algorithms by name, referenced a forum post she'd made under a pseudonym about machine learning ethics. This wasn't a mass recruitment blast. This was targeted, personal, researched. Dear Ms. Volkov, it began, the formality already elevating it above the casual approaches she typically received. Your work on behavioral prediction matrices has come to our attention through your publications and your contributions to the ML Ethics Forum under the username Digital Conscience. We believe your particular expertise aligns perfectly with a project we're developing for the Southeast Asian market, specifically focused on personalized user experience optimization for high-net-worth individuals. The salary figure made her read it 3 times. 80,000 euros annually, with housing provided, relocation assistance, and a signing bonus of 10,000 euros, half paid upfront upon contract acceptance. It was more money than she'd made in the past 3 years combined. Enough to pay for her mother's surgery, to clear the debts that hung over her family like storm clouds perpetually threatening to break. Natasha researched with the methodical precision that defined her professional life. Technova Solutions had a gleaming website, office locations in Singapore and Dubai, a portfolio of impressive but vague projects for financial institutions and luxury service providers. Their LinkedIn showed 53 employees, including a charismatic CEO named Marcus Chen whose biography claimed stints at Google and several successful startups. The company had been registered for 4 years, had tax records, business licenses, even a few articles in tech publications about their innovative approaches to customer experience. Her best friend Irina, a journalist who developed healthy paranoia through years of investigating corruption, reviewed everything Natasha sent her. After 2 days of digging, Irina called with a verdict that carried both caution and reluctant approval. It looks legitimate, Irina said, though her tone held reservations. I can't find any red flags. The company exists, the people exist, the projects they claim seem real enough. My only concern is how little concrete information there is about what they actually do. Lots of buzzwords, not much substance. That's every tech company, Natasha replied, already mentally calculating how quickly she could pay off her mother's medical debts. True. But promise me something. Keep your phone on international roaming, check in with me regularly, and if anything feels wrong, get to an embassy immediately. Natasha promised, though the warnings felt like paranoid overcaution. This was Singapore, one of the safest, most regulated cities on Earth, not some lawless territory where people vanished without consequence. What could possibly go wrong in a place where chewing gum was illegal and littering carried substantial fines? The contract arrived via courier, thick and official, bound in leather with golden embossing. Natasha read every page twice, her developers I trained to catch errors and hidden clauses. The language seemed standard, work obligations, non-disclosure agreements, terms of employment that favored the employer but nothing that screamed exploitation. There were sections in English that she translated carefully, housing agreements, visa sponsorship documents, bank account authorizations that seemed necessary for someone relocating internationally. What she didn't fully grasp, what her intermediate English couldn't quite parse through the legal jargon, was how comprehensively those documents granted Technova control over her documentation, her finances, her legal status in a country where she would have no family, no friends, no support network beyond what the company provided. She signed. The first €5,000 appeared in her account within 24 hours. The flight to Singapore stretched across 12 hours and 8 time zones, each mile carrying Natasha further from everything familiar into a future that promised transformation. She watched movies, studied basic Mandarin phrases from a language app, and imagined the apartment she'd been promised, a modern space in the city center, so different from her Minsk studio where mushrooms grew in the bathroom corners during humid summers. Marcus Chen met her at Changi Airport personally, a gesture that seemed to confirm the company's investment in her talents. He was exactly as his photos suggested, mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of smooth confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. His handshake was firm, his smile warm but professional. "Natasha, welcome to Singapore," he said, his accent British inflected, polished. "I trust your flight was comfortable. We're very excited to have you joining our team. Your work on predictive algorithms is exactly what we need for our next phase." The drive through Singapore dazzled her. Glass towers reflected the tropical sun, creating canyons of light and shadow. Everything was clean, ordered, efficient in a way that made Minsk seem like a charcoal sketch compared to this high-definition reality. They passed Marina Bay, the iconic hotel ship perched atop 3 towers, gardens of towering artificial trees, streets where not a single piece of litter marred the perfection. "Your apartment is in River Valley," Marcus explained as they drove. "Close to the office, excellent neighborhood, everything you need nearby. We want you comfortable so you can focus entirely on the project." The apartment exceeded her expectations. 30th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Singapore River, furniture that looked lifted from an interior design magazine, a kitchen with appliances she'd only seen in advertisements. It was 3 times the size of her Minsk apartment, with none of the peeling paint, temperamental plumbing, or persistent drafts. "Get settled today," Marcus said, handing her a key card and a smartphone, still in its box. "This is your work phone, already configured with our systems. Your building access, office access, everything is linked to your biometrics, fingerprint and facial recognition. Very secure, very convenient. Tomorrow we'll begin your orientation. I think you'll find the project fascinating." The door closed behind him with a soft click that Natasha would later remember as the sound of a trap engaging. That evening, she unpacked her suitcase, hanging her few professional clothes in a closet large enough to park a car. She tried to call her mother using the apartment's internet, but the connection required authentication she didn't have credentials for. Her personal phone, still on international roaming, worked but the connection was frustratingly slow. She sent Irina a message saying she'd arrived safely, that everything looked good, that she'd call with more details once she was settled. The work phone Marcus had provided connected instantly. She explored its contents, finding it stripped of most standard apps, configured only with secure email, encrypted messaging, and access to Technova's internal systems. When she tried to download additional applications, she found the device locked to administrator-approved software only. Strange, but perhaps normal for a company working with sensitive financial data, she reasoned. Security-conscious corporations often locked down devices to prevent data breaches. The first signs of wrongness arrived with morning light. Natasha woke early, accustomed to Minsk's time zone despite the overnight flight's exhaustion. She tried again to connect her personal devices to the building's Wi-Fi, but the network required credentials she hadn't received. When she went to the building's management office, a polite but unhelpful receptionist explained that her apartment's internet access had been configured for business use only through her employer's systems. For residents working with sensitive corporate data, the woman explained in accented English. Your employer handles the access management. You'll need to speak with them about personal internet use. A small thing, easily explained, yet something about it made Natasha's instincts prickle. She was a developer, she understood network security, and this level of restriction seemed excessive even for financial sector work. Marcus arrived to collect her at 9, his smile as polished as the previous day. They drove not to the gleaming business district she'd expected, but to an industrial area near the port, where warehouses and logistics companies occupied functional concrete buildings behind high fences. "We keep our development team separate from the main offices," Marcus explained, noting her confused expression. "Security protocol. The work you'll be doing is highly confidential, and we've found that physical isolation helps prevent information leaks." The building looked nothing like a tech company. No startup decorations, no colorful branding, no open floor plans with bean-bag chairs and ping-pong tables. Instead, they entered through a security checkpoint with armed guards, passed through metal detectors and biometric scanners, and were led down corridors that felt more like a high-security facility than a creative workplace. Marcus's office was on the 3rd floor, spartanly furnished with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking the parking lot. He gestured for Natasha to sit, then settled behind the desk with an expression that had shifted from welcoming to businesslike in the span of a hallway. "Before we discuss your project," Marcus began, "I need to clarify something about your role here." Natasha felt her stomach tighten. The words carried a weight that didn't match their neutral delivery. "Technova Solutions is, in fact, a legitimate technology company," Marcus continued. "We do work on behavioral prediction, user experience optimization, all the things described in your contract. However, the specific application of your skills will be somewhat different than you might have anticipated." "I don't understand," Natasha said, though a creeping dread suggested she was beginning to. Marcus opened a laptop, turned it to face her, and displayed a series of photographs. Luxury hotels, private jets, yachts anchored in turquoise waters, expensive cars, and in every image, beautiful women accompanying older, wealthy-looking men. "We provide premium companionship services to extremely high-net-worth individuals across Asia and the Middle East," Marcus explained with the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a logistics operation. "The behavioral algorithms you'll develop will help us match our companions with clients more effectively, predict preferences, optimize scheduling, manage the entire operation with maximum efficiency." Natasha's mouth went dry. "You're talking about escort services." "We're talking about a multi-million-dollar industry that serves people who demand perfection and pay extraordinary amounts for it," Marcus corrected. "Your technical skills will help us provide that perfection. However, there's another aspect to this role." He slid a folder across the desk. Natasha opened it with trembling hands, finding photographs of herself from the past 3 days, at the airport, in her apartment through the window, even sleeping that first night. Surveillance so comprehensive it made her skin crawl. "The women who work as our companions are recruited from various countries," Marcus continued. "Many come willingly, understanding exactly what the work entails. Others, like yourself, are recruited for their specific skills but also for their physical attributes. You fit a particular aesthetic profile that certain clients pay premium rates for. Educated, Eastern European, technically sophisticated. There's a market for that." Natasha stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. I'm leaving. I'll go to the embassy, report this. You can't hold me here." Marcus didn't move, didn't raise his voice, simply continued with the same calm delivery. "Your work visa is sponsored entirely by Technova. Your apartment lease, your bank account here, all under our administrative control. The documents you signed included power of attorney clauses that give us legal authority over your affairs for the duration of your employment contract. You read them. You signed them." "Those were in English," Natasha protested, hearing the weakness in her own voice. "I didn't fully understand." "That's not our problem. Legally, you're bound to the contract. Singapore has very strict laws about violating employment agreements. Breaking your contract means owing substantial financial penalties, potentially facing deportation with a blacklist status that would prevent you from working in most developed countries." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost sympathetic. "But let's be practical, Natasha. You came here because you needed money. Your mother needs expensive medical treatment. Your family has debts. We can make all of that disappear. The work is not as terrible as you're imagining. Wealthy men who want beautiful, intelligent women to accompany them to events, dinners, occasionally more intimate situations. You'll live in luxury, wear expensive clothes, travel to exotic locations, and be compensated extremely well. You're describing sex work, Natasha said flatly. We're describing a sophisticated service industry, Marcus replied. And yes, physical intimacy is part of that service. But it's conducted in safe, controlled environments with clients we thoroughly vet. You won't be standing on street corners. You'll be attending galas at 5-star hotels. Natasha felt the room tilting, reality sliding into something surreal and nightmarish. And if I refuse? Marcus pulled up another image on his laptop, security camera footage of her mother's apartment building in Minsk, time-stamped from that morning. An elderly woman struggling with shopping bags, the person Natasha had sacrificed everything to help. We have associates in Belarus, Marcus said quietly. Your mother's safety, your family's well-being, these can be guaranteed or they can become complicated. We're not monsters, Natasha. We simply run a business that requires cooperation. Make this easy, and everyone benefits. Make it difficult, and people you love suffer consequences. The explicit threat landed like a physical blow. Natasha sank back into her chair, her mind racing through scenarios, escapes, solutions, finding none that didn't end in disaster. She was in a foreign country with no support network, her legal status controlled by these people, her family vulnerable thousands of miles away. What happens now? She asked, hating the defeat in her voice. Now you begin training, Marcus said, his smile returning. You'll meet your coordinator, learn what's expected, and start your real work. Both the technical aspects and the personal service aspects. Consider this an adjustment period. The door opened, and a woman entered. Late 30s, expensively dressed, with the kind of beauty that came from strategic investment in appearance. She smiled at Natasha with something that might have been sympathy or might have been predatory assessment. This is Vera, Marcus introduced. She manages our companions. She'll help you transition into your new role. Vera extended a perfectly manicured hand. Welcome to the family, darling. I know this is overwhelming, but I promise you'll adapt. They all do eventually. The training facility occupied the building's 4th floor, a series of rooms that felt like a twisted finishing school. Over the following days, Natasha discovered she was one of 11 women in similar circumstances. They ranged from 23 to 32, came from Ukraine, Moldova, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, each recruited through elaborate schemes that had promised legitimate work and delivered this nightmare instead. Marina, a Ukrainian woman in her late 20s who'd been there longest, explained the reality during their first private conversation, whispered in a makeup room while Vera was occupied with another new arrival. They're very good at selecting who they target, Marina said, applying lipstick with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done it thousands of times. Women with technical skills, language abilities, professional backgrounds. Clients pay more for the fantasy that we're not prostitutes, that we're educated women who choose this lifestyle. The higher the illusion quality, the higher the rates they can charge. How long have you been here? Natasha asked. 18 months. I was recruited as a translator. Spoke 5 languages, thought I was going to work for an international law firm. Instead, I'm fluent in other things now. The bitterness in Marina's voice was razor-edged. Have you tried to escape? Marina laughed, a sound empty of humor. Twice. First time, I made it to a police station. They called the company to verify my status, and Marcus showed up with my employment contract, my visa documents, explained I was having a mental health crisis. They apologized to him for the inconvenience. Second time, I got as far as the Malaysian border before they found me. The punishment was 3 days locked in a room with no food, then being forced to service 10 clients in a single week with all fees docked from my supposed earnings. Natasha felt her remaining hope crumbling. They have connections with the police? Not officially. But they have lawyers, documentation, money to make problems disappear. And Singapore has cameras everywhere, facial recognition technology integrated into everything. Running is nearly impossible, and even if you succeed, they've made clear what happens to our families back home. The training was methodical and degrading. They learned how to dress for different types of clients, how to engage in conversation that made wealthy men feel interesting, how to read body language and anticipate desires, how to provide companionship that felt authentic while remaining utterly transactional. They practiced conversation, studied wine lists, learned about luxury brands and business sectors their clients operated in. And they learned the rules. Never resist a client. Never discuss the nature of the business with anyone outside the organization. Never attempt to contact family without supervision. Never refuse an assignment. Violation of any rule resulted in punishment that ranged from reduced earnings to physical consequences that Vera described vaguely but threateningly. Natasha's first assignment came 2 weeks after her arrival. A Malaysian businessman, 50s, wealthy from palm oil plantations, wanted a companion for a 3-day business trip to Bali. Intelligent, educated, good conversationalist, the request specified. That meant Natasha. Vera prepared her like a doll, expensive dress, professional makeup, jewelry that probably cost more than Natasha had earned in a year in Minsk. Remember, Vera said, adjusting Natasha's necklace, you're not a victim. You're a premium service. The moment you internalize that, the easier everything becomes. The trip to Bali was a blur of luxury and horror. The businessman, whose name she was told to call him Richard though she doubted that was real, treated her with surface courtesy, introducing her as his associate at business meetings, engaging her in conversations about technology and current events over expensive dinners. Then, in the privacy of their hotel suite, he treated her with the casual entitlement of someone who'd paid for temporary ownership. Natasha dissociated, her mind retreating to a space where she observed from a distance, watching the physical actions happen to someone else's body. It was a survival mechanism that many of the women had mastered, being present but absent simultaneously, enduring while pretending not to experience. When she returned to Singapore, Vera reviewed her performance based on Richard's feedback. He was very satisfied, she said, as if discussing a restaurant service review. He's requested you for his next trip in 3 weeks. That's excellent. Repeat clients mean you're doing something right. The weeks blurred into months. Natasha serviced clients, businessmen, politicians, sometimes younger tech entrepreneurs who wanted the fantasy of dating someone brilliant and beautiful. Between assignments, she worked on the algorithms Marcus had originally mentioned, building predictive models that matched companion profiles with client preferences, optimizing the company's operations with the same technical brilliance she'd once applied to legitimate projects. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was using her genius to perfect her own imprisonment. She tried to maintain hope, looking for escape opportunities, but the system was sophisticated. Her work phone was monitored, her apartment internet restricted, her movements tracked through Singapore's ubiquitous surveillance network. The few times she attempted to access help, reaching out to embassy websites through public computers or trying to contact international organizations, the communications were intercepted. Once, she managed to send an email to Interpol's trafficking hotline, only to have Marcus confront her the next day with printouts of her message. We monitor everything, he explained, almost bored. Every keystroke, every website, every attempt. This is Singapore, Natasha. Privacy is an illusion here, even for citizens, much more so for foreign workers under our management. Stop wasting energy on escape fantasies and focus on your work. The punishment for that attempt was severe. A week with no assignments meant no earnings, combined with explicit threats about her mother's safety that included photographs of her mother's daily routines, demonstrating how easily she could be reached. Natasha stopped trying. Hopelessness became a weight that pressed down constantly, suffocating any remaining resistance. She serviced clients, smiled, performed, and felt pieces of herself eroding with each transaction. The woman who'd once been excited about neural networks and algorithm optimization became someone who existed in the spaces between being used, mechanical and hollow. The other women understood. They formed a silent sisterhood of survival, sharing small kindnesses, extra makeup, cigarettes, moments of genuine laughter that felt like rebellion against their circumstances. They didn't talk about escape anymore. They talked about endurance, about getting through one more day, one more client, one more performance. 18 months after her arrival, Natasha no longer recognized herself in mirrors. The woman staring back had her face but empty eyes, a body maintained at peak attractiveness through gym regimes and dietary restrictions imposed by Vera, a smile that had become a mask she couldn't remove. She thought often about ending it. The apartments had windows that didn't open far enough to jump from, and she lacked access to medications in sufficient quantities, but there were other methods. What stopped her was the knowledge that her death would mean her mother losing the money transfers that kept her alive, that sustained her medical care. Even in her despair, Natasha couldn't condemn her mother to death through her own escape. So she endured. Hoped for nothing. Expected nothing. Simply existed in the mechanical routine of being used. The raid came on a Friday morning, violent and sudden. Natasha was in the training facility, practicing conversational skills with two new arrivals who'd been recruited under the same false pretenses she'd fallen for. Vera was demonstrating proper wine service when the doors exploded inward, armed police in tactical gear flooding the space, shouting commands in English and Mandarin. Everything was chaos. Women screaming, Vera trying to run before being tackled to the floor, Marcus and his security team restrained with zip ties, more police than Natasha had ever seen in one place. Someone pulled her to her feet, a female officer speaking in accented English. "Are you being held against your will?" the officer demanded. "Do you need medical assistance?" Natasha couldn't speak. Words had fled. She could only nod, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling so violently the officer had to support her weight. The investigation later revealed that one of the newer arrivals had managed to contact her embassy before being fully integrated into the system, that her disappearance had triggered an international investigation coordinated between Interpol, Singapore's Criminal Investigation Department, and several European law enforcement agencies. They'd been building a case for months, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to strike. They found everything. Financial records documenting millions in transactions, client lists that included names that would later make international headlines, evidence of trafficking operations spanning 8 countries, documentation of the sophisticated systems used to trap and control women like Natasha. In the immediate aftermath, Natasha and the other women were taken to a protected facility, a shelter run by an anti-trafficking NGO where they received medical care, psychological support, and legal assistance. Social workers with gentle voices explained their rights, the process for repatriation, the resources available for rebuilding their lives. Natasha sat in a small room with sunlight streaming through uncovered windows, listening to a counselor explain trauma responses, and felt nothing. 18 months of dissociation had created a numbness so profound that even liberation couldn't penetrate it. What you experienced was severe psychological and physical trauma, the counselor explained. Recovery isn't immediate. It's a process that takes time, often years. But you're safe now. That's the first step. Safe. The word felt foreign, a concept Natasha had forgotten existed. They found her mother in Minsk, explained what had happened, arranged for her continued medical care through victim compensation funds. Her mother cried on the video call, apologizing endlessly for not knowing, for not somehow preventing this, as if a woman dying of cancer could have protected her daughter from a sophisticated criminal network. "It's not your fault, Mama," Natasha said, the words automatic. "I'm alive. That's what matters." But she wasn't sure if that was true. Something essential had been carved out of her during those 18 months, something that might never regenerate. The trial took place a year later. Natasha testified via video link from a protected location, her face obscured, her voice altered. She described the recruitment, the threats, the systematic exploitation. Marcus sat in the defendant's box, his expression unreadable, showing no remorse, no acknowledgement of the harm he'd orchestrated. He received 25 years. Vera got 18. Other members of the organization received sentences ranging from 8 to 20 years. The client list sparked separate investigations that would stretch across multiple jurisdictions for years to come. Natasha felt nothing when the sentences were announced. Revenge, justice, consequences, they were concepts that belonged to someone who still had the capacity to feel, and she'd left that person behind in a luxury apartment overlooking the Singapore River. The compensation money sat in her bank account, substantial enough to ensure financial security for years, possibly life. She couldn't touch it. The thought of spending money earned through her own exploitation made her physically ill. Instead, she existed. Therapy sessions, medication for depression and anxiety, days that blended into each other with no particular purpose or direction. She moved through the world like a ghost, present but not participating, alive but not living. Marina, who'd become something like a friend through their shared trauma, called occasionally. She'd moved back to Ukraine, was working with an NGO that supported trafficking survivors. "You should consider doing advocacy work," she suggested during one call. "Turn what happened to us into something that helps others." "I can't," Natasha replied. "I don't have anything left to give." She understood, dimly, that she was one of the lucky ones. She'd been found. Rescued. Many women in similar situations never escaped, died in captivity, or were discarded when they were no longer profitable. Her survival was statistically remarkable. But it didn't feel like survival. It felt like existing in a liminal space between death and life, trapped in memories that played in endless loops, in sensations that wouldn't fade, in a fundamental brokenness that no amount of therapy seemed capable of mending. 2 years after the raid, Natasha lived in a small apartment in Gdansk, Poland, far from Belarus, far from Singapore, far from anywhere that held memories. She didn't work. Couldn't focus on code anymore, the thing she'd once loved now tainted by its association with the algorithms she'd built for her captors. She spent her days walking along the Baltic Sea, watching waves that moved with purposeless repetition, feeling a kinship with their endless, meaningless cycle. Sometimes she thought about the person she'd been before. The developer excited about neural networks, the daughter desperate to save her mother, the woman who believed in the possibility of transformation through opportunity. That person felt like fiction, a character from someone else's story. Marina called again, persistent in her gentle way. "There's a survivors' conference in Berlin next month," she said. "Several of us are going. It might help to be around people who understand." "I don't think I can," Natasha replied, the words familiar from the countless similar conversations they'd had. "You're allowed to be broken, Natasha. What they did to you was designed to break you. But you're also allowed to heal, even if healing looks different than you expected." After Marina hung up, Natasha sat in her apartment as evening light faded, thinking about healing, about whether she even wanted to try. The effort of rebuilding seemed insurmountable, requiring energy she didn't possess for a future she couldn't imagine. The woman the police found had been used, exploited, drained of everything that made her who she was. They'd rescued her body, but the person she'd been before remained trapped in that luxury apartment, in those hotel rooms, in those moments of systematic destruction. And Natasha wasn't sure that person would ever find her way back. She'd survived. But survival, she'd learned, was not the same as living. Some prisons had bars you could see, could fight against, could potentially escape. The prison she lived in now existed internally, built from trauma and memory, and she'd long since stopped looking for the key. The waves kept moving beyond her window, and she kept breathing, and that was all she could manage. For now, perhaps forever, it would have to be enough.